or set them to vibrate, excuse me. Anyone wishing to speak tonight, please fill out a public hearing speaking card. A total of 10 minutes will be allowed for anyone wishing to speak in favor of a case and 10 minutes for anyone wishing to speak in opposition. For example, if 10 people wish to speak, they must share the 10-minute slot. When you are speaking, please face the board and address us directly, not the audience. If you turn to speak to the audience, the board will assume you are finished and call for the next speaker. At this time, please stand for the invocation and pledge, please. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for your blessings, and we ask that you be with us in decisions that's made this evening. These things I ask in Jesus' name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This meeting is now called to order. Can I get a motion to accept the agenda? Have a motion?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor? Motion carries. Staff, do we have any comments this evening?
No comments at this time, Mr. Chair.
Okay, if there's no comments, we'd like to move forward and call the first case.
Comprehensive Plan Amendment 2102, CHI Acquisitions LP of Atlanta, Georgia, request an amendment to the comprehensive plan for property located west of North Bridges Road and east of Interstate 75 in land lots 113 and 114 of the 6th District. The property consists of 53.85 plus or minus acres, and the request is to amend the future land use map designation from mixed use to industrial. Located in District 3, presented by Stacy Rudisil, Assistant Director.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, board members. If we could have the laptop on the screen, please. Our next two hearings are about the same property on North Bridges Road. The first hearing is regarding a comprehensive plan amendment, specifically a change that's requested to the future land use map that designates this property for mixed use uses, which is intended to support the applicant's request for rezoning from C3 to M1, and the rezoning will be the subject of our next hearing. So just for the sake of the audience, I just want to remind them that after this hearing is over, please stick around for the next hearing. We'll talk about the rezoning at that time. This subject property is located at exit 221, and this is on the south side of Jonesboro Road, east of I-75. So North Bridges Road, from which this property takes access, it connects Jonesboro Road with Mount Carmel Road on the east side of I-75. As I stated, this subject property has a future land use map designation of mixed use, which is indicated in this pink lavender area. And you can see that this land use designation, it's consistent around exit 221. The applicant's request that we'll get into more in the next public hearing under rezoning is for a warehouse and distribution facility, and this requires a rezoning to M1, but that M1 zoning is not supported in that mixed use future land use map designation, and so that is why the applicant is requesting that future land use map designation be changed from mixed use to industrial. So staff has considered the applicant's request. We've considered the character of the area. We've considered the fact that exit 221 is consistently on all four quadrants being designated for mixed use. and we've considered how industrial for the vision for this area as a commercial and higher density residential area is not consistent. So for those reasons, staff does recommend denial of the applicant's request, and I'd be pleased to answer questions.
Thank you, Stacy. Does the board have questions for staff?
Yes, I have some.
Mr. Richard?
I believe that recently, maybe in the last couple of years, the Board of Commissioners made a modification to the mixed-use zoning, and I guess also which would affect the land use plan, to modify it by taking out the industrial land use. Is that correct? And when was that done?
Yes, sir. Mr. Risher, you are correct. And it was done in the past year or so. The Board of Commissioners made a change to the comprehensive plan, namely the chart that is included in the comprehensive plan, which staff refers to know which particular zoning districts are supported in which land use category, as indicated in the colors on the map. And so, yes, the Board of Commissioners was not in favor of the industrial zoning districts being supported in that mixed-use land use designation, and that change was made. And at the same time, the Board of Commissioners also indicated that the general commercial and the highway commercial zoning districts as well were not supported in that mixed-use land use category. So, yes, Mr. Risher, that is correct.
One of the parcels that was part of the proposed promenade, large-scale commercial development, a very large retail project which did not follow through, but as it happened, I guess it's been withdrawn, perhaps for good. But now many of the other parcels that were involved in that acquisition, they were subsequently allowed to be reverted. I think many of them went back to the original zoning of RA, if I'm not mistaken. And then, did the action to modify the MU district by deleting the industrial deck cause this particular tract to be treated differently from the others that were reverted?
No, sir. So, Mr. Risher, again, you're absolutely correct. And what you're referring to is the zoning map that's illustrated on the overhead and also in the exhibits. The subject property is outlined in green, and you can see that it and the properties to the north and so forth are indicated in that crimson red color. The properties immediately across North Bridges from the subject property are shaded in white. That white stands for residential agricultural. And those properties were a part of that Henry Promenade that you're speaking of. And those properties were rezoned to C3 together with our subject property as that larger Henry Promenade development. And yes, we did refer to it, Mr. Risher, as a reversion, but technically speaking, it wasn't a reversion per se as something that the county initiated, but rather each of the owners of those properties that went back to RA, they requested rezoning from C3 to RA, much like our subject property is requesting rezoning from C3 to something else. In most of these cases, the properties had been RA before being rezoned for Henry Promenade, except possibly for one, which I believe was M1, but I don't want to rely on my memory for that. But yes, Mr. Risher, you're correct in that. It is not my, what I would believe to say that this subject property is being treated any differently. They're requesting rezoning just like those properties across North Bridges. However, instead of requesting a residential agricultural, which those properties are largely single-family homes, this property is requesting an M1. And interestingly enough, before Henry Promenade, this property was zoned M1. And it was zoned M1 for a number of years and had never developed. So it makes, well, I don't want to speculate on that. But let me just say that in the zoning history of this subject property, it had been M1, it's now C3, and they're requesting M1 again, which is no longer in character, in our estimation, with the area.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions?
No.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions for staff? Okay. If not, we'd like the applicant to come forward, please. Please state your name and address for the record.
Well, good evening. My name is Warren Tillery, and I'm a lawyer at Smith Welch, Webb & White. We're representing the applicant, which is Crow Industrial Holdings, and the owners of the property is McGarity Commercial Properties, and they're represented by Doug Dillard. There's a couple of things that I'd like to address that Stacy had mentioned on in response to Mr. Risher's questions. Specifically, this would be, a denial of this comprehensive plan would be treating the property differently than the properties that have already been reverted. And let me tell you how. This property was originally zoned M1. The other properties were originally zoned RA. When they were rezoned with a comprehensive plan amendment. The comprehensive plan at the time they were all zoned C3 was medium to high density residential. So when these properties, some of which were RA, ours was M1, were rezoned to commercial, there was a comp plan amendment. The comp plan amendment went from medium to high density residential to commercial. So there's one change to the comp plan amendment. Approval for that change was recommended. Now, when the properties there to the right side of North Bridges Road were reverted, the first one that was reverted had a comp plan amendment too. And that comp plan amendment changed the future land use map from commercial to rural residential. And it did so in response to a request by the property owner contemporaneously with the request to rezone RA. So you've got a change that's being made to the future land use map to change it from commercial to RA. Then you have a contemporaneous zoning that goes from C3 back to the RA that it was originally. Now, when the first one of these reversions took place, the staff, and in fact it was Stacy, recommended denial. And the reason for that is when these properties all came together as one big C3, it did so with conditions. And I don't want to get too far into the zoning on the comp plan part of it, but I think it's really important to understand the interplay between these parcels. These parcels, when they were zoned C3, were done so with conditions, and the conditions required development of all the parcels as one. Now that there's been parcels reverted back to RA, you can never develop the subject property under the C3 zoning because you can't develop the rest of them under that C3 zoning since they're no longer zoned that. Staff recommended that, or actually recognized that at that time, and recommended denial of the comprehensive plan amendment. And they specifically noted in there that the change would do exactly what I'm talking about. It would prevent the property from being developed. It's also interesting to note that on the first reversion, the Zoning Advisory Board voted to deny the future land use map amendment, but when it came up for the contemporaneous rezoning, it voted to approve the contemporaneous rezoning back to RA for the other properties. Now, why is that relevant? Well, First, it establishes that you don't need a comp plan amendment to accomplish the rezoning. But comp plan amendments are not static, they're dynamic. They change over time, they are the guiding policy, but we have a specific method that we can amend the comp plan. And in fact, that was done for the other properties across the street solely to allow them to go back to what they were before. That is all that we are asking here today, is to go back to the M1 zoning that we had originally before we combined those parcels into C3 and then the development nevertheless failed. Now, the property owner has looked at this. We've had experts look at this. The highest and best use of this property is M1. But for purposes of this comp plan, the comp plan amendment has since changed. It's gone from the 2030 to the 2040 plan. 2040 plan has a preference against industrial in this area, sure. But if you look at what the actual intent of the mixed use is, it's to allow a number of uses to be used. And you can see that right here on this plan. You've got RA, you've got some commercial. If we go back and revert it to the M1 we already had, it's no different. It doesn't defeat the actual character of mixed use. Notwithstanding, I understand there's some policies on that. You're also treating this property owner differently than the second reversion. Now, on the second reversion, and this is the interesting fact, there was no contemporaneous comprehensive plan amendment, no future land use change. Nevertheless, the property was allowed to be reverted back to the zoning that it had before, RA. So again, we're not asking for anything different than what has already been given to those property owners. Put us back to where we were. And to the extent that the future land use map is a guide in that endeavor, it can obviously be amended. In fact, you've already done that. And so that's why we're being, if this comp plan amendment is denied, we're being treated differently. Separately, Stacy had mentioned that this was not a reversion per se, that what it was is the applicants actually requested it and applied for it. It's the same exact thing that we have here. And the reason that I mention that is in the application, it's one that we've made part of the record in number 1, and you have part of it in the staff report. But in the application, we included certified copies of what I'm talking about with regard to the future land use amendments that have occurred, the minutes regarding what this board's recommendations were. Now, those were attachments to the letter. So when you see the letter on my firm's letterhead in your packet, you won't see the attachments in there, but I'm happy to show anybody that that's what it was at the time, and we have support for that. So for that reason, the denial of it would be treating us differently.
Okay, anything else, sir?
Not for me.
Okay. Does the board have questions for the applicant? No questions? All right, well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. At this time, we'd like to allot the remaining time for anyone wishing to speak in favor of this case. We have about 3 minutes and 16 seconds for anyone wishing to speak in favor. Okay, no one's coming forward. We'd like to allot 10 minutes for anyone wishing to speak in opposition. Okay. Does the board have additional questions for the applicant or staff? Mr. Vim?
For staff. On the portions that went back to RA, do you know what year that was?
I don't. It's been a number of years, Mr. VM. Our future land use map changed countywide in 2018, so it would have been before 2018.
Okay, so it happened before the change in the comprehensive plan now that
Yes,
is
sir.
currently in place.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
If I may, I have the answer to your question.
So I'm going to go ahead and allow you to answer that question, but we've given you the time at this point. But go ahead with that answer.
Sure. So the first reversion took place in late 2016. Second reversion took place in early 2017.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Any additional questions for staff?
Ask one question to get kind of clear in my mind. At the time that the that the mixed-use ordinance was amended to take out industrial and other uses, was that also coincided with the actions to encourage, say distribution activities to locate within existing parks, that are, zoned, for that purpose?
And Mr. Risher, I think I know that the action that you're speaking of. I don't know that it was at the same time. I know that the board has stated in a number of public meetings that they wish to encourage development, industrial development, specifically warehousing and distribution, to be limited to the areas that have already been zoned for that purpose. I can tell you that our Highway Corridor Overlay District, which was adopted in 2016 and amended in 2018, it specifically prohibits warehousing and distribution unless it takes place on property that was already zoned at the time of adoption. So it's definitely the direction of the board, Mr. Risher, but I'm not aware of any specific resolution or action that has been taken by the BOC.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions for our staff? Okay, any additional questions for staff or the applicant? Okay. If not, we'd like to call the case, please.
Comprehensive Plan Amendment 2102, CHI Acquisitions, LP of Atlanta, Georgia, request an amendment to the comprehensive plan for property located west of North Bridges Road and east of Interstate 75 in land lots 113 and 114 of the 6th District. The property consists of 53.85 plus or minus acres, and the request is to amend the future land use map designation from mixed use to industrial. Located in District 3, presented by Stacy Jordan Rudisil, Assistant Director.
Okay. We've heard the case. Do we have a motion?
Yes, I make a motion to deny the request.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor? Motion carries. Call the next case, please.
RZ 2108, CHI Acquisitions, LP of Atlanta, Georgia, request a rezoning from C3 Highway Commercial to M1 Light Manufacturing for property located west of North Bridges Road and east of Interstate 75 in land lots 113 and 114 of the 6th District. The property consists of 53.85 plus or minus acres, and the request is for a warehouse. Located in District 3, presented by Stacy Jordan Rudisil, Assistant Director.
Good evening. Good evening.
Again, this is our same subject property that we treated in the last hearing. This hearing is regarding the requested rezoning of the subject property from C3 Highway Commercial to M1 to support the development of the subject property for warehousing and distribution. As we had touched on in our last hearing, the future land use map designation, as indicated in this pink lavender area, is for mixed use. And as Mr. Risher had pointed out, mixed use does not support the M1 zoning district. And you can tell by this map that the areas around exit 221 it's very consistent that it is designated for mixed use land uses. The applicant's request, as illustrated on the overhead and also in your exhibits, is for a 450,000 square foot warehousing and distribution center. It would at least require the improvement of North Bridges Road, which happens to be an unimproved gravel road at this time. It's very difficult, I can tell you from personal experience, to make a left onto Jonesboro Road. It may not be appropriate for the trucks to access Mount Carmel, which is not a truck route that I'm aware of. So this site, though it backs up to the interstate, has challenges and may be problematic for development for warehousing and distribution. Staff has evaluated the applicant's request. We've considered the future land use map. We've considered the character of the area. We've considered the vision for this exit as a gateway to the community, as a gateway to the city of McDonough. The vision that's been expressed is not for warehousing and distribution in this area. And so for these reasons, staff recommends denial of the applicant's request.
Okay. We've heard the case. Do we have questions for our staff? Does the board have questions for staff? Ms. Randolph?
Stacy, do we think that anything is available to be developed here in the future?
So I can tell you that the county is legally authorized to regulate property. And in so doing, a landowner or an applicant doesn't have an express right to the highest and best use, but rather they have a right to a reasonable economic return on their property. And I think the nature of your question, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is about timing. And the applicant has indicated that they have an end user for the subject property at this time, and they've not indicated that they have a user for any other purpose. So, but that's not to say that this location does not lend itself to development for another purpose in the future. So for example, if there is, well, if you look at the other four quadrants of exit 221, on Foster Drive, we received a request just a couple of months ago for a mixed-use development that had a commercial portion, it had a residential portion. We've had similar requests on the west side of I-75. And of course, as you and others are aware, the west side of I-75 has really blossomed with commercial growth and so forth. So I would say, in answer to your question, that even though there may not be an end user at this time, that this subject property, as long as the road can be improved and traffic can be addressed, may be very marketable for a purpose other than warehousing and distribution.
Thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions for our staff? If not, we'd like the applicant to come forward again, please. Once again, state your name and address for the record.
Sure. Good evening again, Warren Tillery. So same deal we had with the comp plan in terms of who the property owners are and who I represent, which is the applicant. So in this particular instance, the property owner and the applicant are seeking a reversion to M1, which is the zoning they had before they got put into the promenade and was collectively rezoned to C3 along with the rest of the properties. And so I'd like to answer a couple of your questions specifically. So I sort of disagree with Stacy a little bit on express right to highest and best use, but let's talk about his second prong, which is a reasonable economic value. Now, in this instance, it was rezoned to C3 and that development failed. And there's been nothing else to be used there since that time. Now, there is an end user there today, but the key to this is that we've had people look at this And there is no economic value for this property as zoned C3. Now there is as M1, and so that would be the only constitutional classification that you could go to, but we're not seeking to go to something that we didn't already have. We were M1 to begin with. So in terms of do we think there's something available there in the future, because that was your question to him. Now, keep in mind that this is one portion of that promenade development, and it backs up to 75 on its west side of the property, North Bridges Road on the east side of the property, Mount Carmel, and then I don't think it makes it all the way to Jonesboro, but at any rate, it doesn't have the type of frontage that would support that commercial use. It doesn't have the availability of the future use to be used as C3. But it is prime for M1, and if you look at the development in that area, there is like a truck repair type facility that's actually across Mount Carmel from it on the east side of 75. So in terms of do we think there's anything that can go there in the future, what everybody that we've had look at this has said is that there's nothing that would be viable there other than basically M1. Now, Stacy sort of made the comment that this is a 450,000 square foot warehouse, right? And I think that's because he wants you to believe that that is really big. What I would point out to the board is that that warehouse size does not trigger the threshold requirements for development of regional impact. So in other words, in terms of industrial uses, it's not that big. Now, just like with the other properties here, what we're asking for is to go back to the M1 that we had before. And the Board of Commissioners has already zoned 2 other properties back to where they were to go RA. And in fact, in some cases, they did so without the comp plan amendment. And, you know, to your question, in that comp plan amendment, sir, when you said that, when did it occur? 16 and 17, the new comp plan comes in 18. But at the time that it reverted then under the comp plan, this didn't match the 2030 comp plan that was in effect either. But be that as it may, the zoning nevertheless went through. So treating those property owners differently than this property owner it gives rise to a situation where you're treating them differently. But I want to take a look a little bit at the staff report. So there's the criteria that staff has considered, you know, in terms of the rezoning. And on that front, staff basically recognizes that we meet 6 out of the 9 criteria. We meet criteria 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now, sure, there are some considerations such as roadway improvements. I don't think, in fact, I know that my client is not looking to develop something of an industrial nature on a dirt road. We know we've got to pave the road. We know we have to bring it up to an industrial standard. The criteria that staff indicates we do not meet are criteria 1, 8, and 9. Now, criteria 1 and 8 deal primarily with the future land use map. And as I've talked to you before about this, the fact that we don't meet it is not something that would warrant denial of this rezoning under those criteria. Criteria 9 is a little bit different. It talks about can it be used as is, and you know what Stacy has said is that it could be used as C3. So I want to address that point specifically. It cannot be used as C3 as it is zoned currently. And the reason is the conditions tied to it make it where you have to develop all the parcels in the development, and the Board of Commissioners has already rezoned 2 of those parcels to RA. So we can never comply with the conditions that are tied to our zoning. But even so, the development failed rather quickly when it was zoned C3. And that's shown by the fact that the rezoning to C3 happened in early 2016, and by late 2016, we already had our first reversion. And in early 17, we had our second reversion. And in fact, this property has sat there since that time when it was rezoned to today. There is everybody who has looked at it, including the property owner and experts hired by it, have concluded that C3 is not a zoning classification that would support a use today. So with that, I think, you know, it goes back to what staff and Stacy in particular recognized when this came up in the reversions. He actually recommended denial of the reversions at that time because it needed to be part of the overall group of parcels. But it wasn't, and some were reverted. So all we're asking is for the same reversion that's already been given to the others. And then, this is one other thing about the uses and intensity. We have come up with a new, it's not really new, we've done it before, but it's an updated traffic study. And these are the same metrics that ARC would use. It's probably the same metrics that staff has already looked at. I have copies for you all since this is sort of a late edition, but I've provided them to staff as well. But what I want to touch on here too is the amount of traffic that is in that area. So basically this traffic study compared warehousing use to the shopping center use contemplated by the promenade. And I know that's a little bit of a hypothetical because we can't build that development as zoned, but the projected traffic flow in terms of daily trips as the promenade, if it were to have been built, is 14,962 daily trips. The warehousing that would be proposed with a 450,000 square foot warehouse, which is what's being, you know, basically proposed here in terms of this, the daily trips are 756. So that's a swing of about 14,200 less trips under the proposed use as M1 than it would be under the C3. Now, along those lines, with the shopping center, it's 274 trips in the AM peak hour totals under shopping centers, 79 with warehousing. So that's a net difference of roughly 200. 966 for a shopping center, 82 for warehousing under PM peak traffic. So that's quite a few less trips. And so the idea that this property is not right for M1 because of traffic is just not borne out by the facts when you consider that the C3 zoning it's already got would have much more intense traffic use. So with that, we would just ask that we be treated the same as everybody else and allow us to go back to our zoning we had before.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Does the board have additional questions for the applicant? Okay. No. Any questions, Mr. Bishop? I have one question, Mr. Tillery. You answered the question in terms of the road. Your client, the client would be willing to build the road according to what you're saying, correct?
Right. We know that you can't have industrial on a dirt road, and we'd have to pave it and bring it up to that standard.
And the next question was the timeline. You indicated that the comp plan was, the reversion took place, according to your timeline, the reversion took place prior to the comp plan?
Well, it depends on which comp plan. So the reversions for the other parcels to RA took place prior to the 2040 Henry comp plan. That took place in 2018. They took place under the comp plan in effect at that time, which was the 2030 comp plan. And at the time of the reversion, the first parcel that reverted to RA was under the 2030 comp plan shown as commercial when it was reverted. Now there was an amendment tied to the rezoning that brought it down to rural residential. For reversion number 2, however, it was commercial as well under the 2030 comp plan. There was no amendment, but the reversion to RA nevertheless happened.
Okay. But after that, the 2030 you're saying took place?
What I'm saying is that at the time they were reverted, the reverted use to RA was not compliant with the then existing comp plan.
Okay.
And so what we're talking about today is likewise not compliant with the now existing comp plan, but the fact that we have a different comp plan doesn't change the issue of it was incompliant then, it's not compliant now.
Well, I guess that's debatable. You're indicating that it doesn't change. I want to just make sure that to staff, based on staff recommendation, is that we're not treating you any differently than we would be treating someone else. But based on the change in the comp plan, is basically a change in the law.
No, sir, it's not, because the comp plan is the guiding policy. But you are treating us differently if you deny the M1 zoning reversion or application, because the Board of Commissioners has granted that reversion in at least 2 other cases. And it did so despite the fact that that reversion didn't comply with that comp plan either.
Okay. Does Mr. VM?
You say that you researched the C3 and there's nobody that wants to take on that, nobody wants to utilize the land for C3. Had you gone and looked at if you had converted it, to mixed use and the availability of other things you could put in there other than C3? Had you approached people to see if there was economic value in that from that zoning?
The highest and best use here is going to be M1. The only other potential use maybe that this could be used for would be high-density residential, meaning apartments.
So, okay, that answers the question.
Okay. Does the board have additional questions for the applicant? Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. We have 2 minutes remaining for anyone wishing to speak in favor. No one's coming forward. We'd like to allot 10 minutes for anyone wishing to speak in opposition. Okay. Does the board have additional questions for staff or the applicant? If not, call the case, please.
Rezoning RZ 2108, CHI Acquisitions LP of Atlanta, Georgia, request a rezoning from C3 Highway Commercial to M1 Light Manufacturing for property located west of North Bridges Road and east of Interstate 75 in land lots 113 and 114 of the 6th District. The property consists of 53.85 plus or minus acres, and the request is for a warehouse located in District 3, presented by Stacy Jordan Rudisil, Assistant Director.
Okay. We've heard the case. Do we have a motion?
To be consistent with the previous case, I make a motion to deny the request for C3.
Okay. I have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? There's no discussion. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Call the next case, please.
Comprehensive Plan Amendment 2105, Southern Crescent of McDonough, Georgia, requests an amendment to the comprehensive plan for property at 2125 Highway 42 North in land lots 31 and 34 of the 7th District. The property consists of 19.995 plus or minus acres, and the request is to amend the future land use map designation from industrial to mixed use. Located in District 4, presented by Stacy Jordan Rudisil, Assistant Director.
Okay.
Chair,
Good evening.
board members. This request before you tonight, it's for the location of the Southern Crescent Brain Trauma Center. And as listed in the zoning history portion of the staff report in your exhibits, this property was rezoned in 1997 to OI, Office Institutional, for the Brain Trauma Center. This rezoning included 8 conditions, and one of them conditioned substantial compliance with the submitted site plan. And so at the beginning, the applicant, under the advisement of staff, had requested a change to the site plan. However, as staff evaluated the applicant's request, it became apparent that this proposal is so different that it warranted a rezoning. And so we advised the applicant that it would be more so in the public interest for them to rezone or request a rezoning from OI to MU, mixed use, which would allow for the assisted living, brain trauma center, and for these attached and detached independent living dwelling units that are being proposed. Interestingly enough, the comprehensive plan includes the future land use map designation of industrial for the brain trauma center location, and that's not consistent with the existing development. And so they're requesting a change in this future land use map designation from industrial to mixed use to support their request for a mixed use zoning district, but also to support the existing designation of the Southern Crescent Brain Trauma Center. Staff has evaluated the applicant's request. We've considered the idea of this remaining industrial on the future land use map, considering the residences that are in this area and so forth. And so staff is confident in recommending approval of the change to the comprehensive plan from industrial to mixed use. And I'd be pleased to answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. Does the board have questions for staff?
Are they going to build the place first, or are they going to do the roads first? Because I know, because the roads are very wide over there. And
Yes, ma'am. My recollection of the road improvements in the area are that Highway 42 is the designation and the jurisdiction of the Georgia Department of Transportation, and they have a plan, and they do intend to widen Highway 42. The question is the timing, and I'm sure that the timing has a lot to do with the funding for the project, and these are things I'm not sure about. And for that reason, I would speculate, and so take it for what it's worth, that if this property is rezoned, that they'll be able to build this property and develop the subject property before the road is improved. But I don't know that to be the gospel truth. I can tell you that there are, and this will be brought out in the next hearing regarding rezoning, but they're proposing approximately 100 additional dwelling units to what the Brain Trauma Center already has. And so there is a question of traffic. And what happens if the site has to be evacuated, or if something unexpected happens and many people are trying to leave at the same time, and there is one point of access to Highway 42. So we'll see in the next hearing that we do include a recommendation that there be a second access point. But beyond that, the site may be considered challenging in that regard, and the applicant may be better able to tell us the possibility of, or the feasibility of what it would take to have a second access point.
thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions for staff? If not, we'd like, I'm sorry, Mr. Richard.
From the site plan that's shown in this exhibit, it looks like that on the northern boundary that there is a proposed roadway extension. Does that mean that there would probably be more units, and if so, would they all be coming off of one entrance that exists right now?
Yes, Mr. Risher, you are correct. The site plan, and I'll see if I can indicate it. This is the point of second access that's illustrated on the site plan that the applicant has proposed. It's staff's understanding that that property would, that second access point would cross property that may be potentially owned by the applicant and provide access to Technology Parkway, which will take you out to Highway 42 at a second location. And this will be brought out more in our second hearing, but staff recommended a condition that simply required a second access point. So if it's not feasible to have that particular access point, that they wouldn't be bound by condition to have to go that way. But yes, Mr. Risher, as you indicated, that is the second access point shown on their site plan.
Anything else, Mr. Richard? Anyone else? Okay, if not, we'd like the applicant to come forward, please. Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Chair, members of the board. My name is Steve Moore with Moore-Bass Consulting, 1350 Keys Ferry Court, McDonough, Georgia. I'm here tonight representing Southern Crescent Rehabilitation and Retirement Company for this future land use map amendment and subsequent rezoning. I'll just give you a little bit more flavor on the intended use of this property. And as Stacy mentioned, it was rezoned to O&I in 1997. I was fortunate enough to be in business then and still in business today, representing that rezoning, and just kind of it was a proud moment when we had the opportunity to work on this again. That 1997 approval allowed for 3 uses on that property. It allowed for the skilled nursing facility, it allowed for the assisted living facility, and it allowed for independent living, made up in both attached and detached residential units. Those 3 units were authorized under that zoning. Only one of those units was actually constructed. That original 97 zoning and the site plan obviously is much different than what we're proposing now, but the approval based on the buildings that were proposed on that site plan actually supported right at 200 total beds and units, residential units and beds in the different facilities. We are, so obviously, as Stacy again mentioned, there was condition number 8 on those zoning conditions that required us to come back to either the zoning board or the planning commission, community development, or if needed, the Board of Commissioners to approve any modifications to that site plan. So, you know, here we are 24 years later, and the market conditions have just changed. The only facility that was built was the skilled nursing facility. And so, you know, just there's lots of things that would affect a site plan. So it was almost nearly impossible to actually follow to the letter of the law that exact site plan for today's, you know, complying with current floodplain requirements, buffers, those types of things all affect the horizontal geometry and the layout of that project. But since, so that one facility has been constructed, and I also wanted to make note too that the original applicant, not the applicant, but the original purchaser of that property once it was zoned is the same person that owns and operates that facility today, is the same person who is the applicant in this request, in both of these requests tonight. So he has been in the community, has made an investment in the community, and has operated a very successful facility and is excited about the opportunity to expand it. The original request, again, just was very consistent with exactly what we're doing, but we understand this to make it clean and make it neat, that a zoning and a future land use map amendment, you know, we were willing to go through that process, even though I still feel like we have a zoning approval that supports what we're already asking to do. But we felt like it was good to work with staff to try to get that modification made. So other than the site plan change, everything that we're asking for is consistent or less intense than that 1997 approval. The new site plan, as you can see here, proposes a gated entrance to Highway 42. That's a condition in there is to be gated. The independent living residential units are both attached and detached. They consist of 2 to 3 bedroom units. They'll all be designed for age-oriented customers and residents of this community. Now, let me be clear too. We're not asking for age targeted. I know we've had a conversation before about what age targeted versus age restricted is. This is an age restricted community. This is a third phase of a 3-phase living arrangement where people can start out in the independent living, transition to the assisted living, and from there to the rehabilitation and nursing facility if necessary. It is mandatory that every resident in this community, whether you're in the assisted living facility or in the independent, that you are part of this plan. You get the same services that's provided to all of the different uses. And I'll go into more detail about what those services are as we enter into the zoning phase of this. But I just wanted to note that what we are asking for, we think is very consistent with that 97 approval. I think Dr. El-Salway has shown that he's a good corporate citizen of the county and is excited about, again, and continuing that investment and expanding that to benefit, I think, a much needed part of Henry County. I don't know that there's many or any facilities that do offer that 3 levels of care in Henry County. I know there's some in Peachtree City, and I've toured some around the south side, but nothing that I've seen in Henry County. But this really is an exciting project. They're excited about the opportunity to really advance this vision that they had some time ago. And with that, I'll leave it open for any questions that you might have regarding the future land use map amendment.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant? Yes, Ms. Randolph.
So basically you have residential pods, is that what it is?
They would be condominiums. So they're fee simple condominiums that the residents could purchase and live there. And they can, as they continue their elderly years, transition from that independent living pod or cottage into the various buildings. That, when they vacate that building, that independent living building, it would then, the owners would have the opportunity, they would have a first right of refusal to purchase that unit back at a fair value, at whatever the current market value is. They would purchase that unit back, and then they would put it back in the pool to sell to the next resident that would be in need of that.
Okay.
But they would be technically condominiums. They would own the 4 walls inside of that. Everything outside of those 4 walls would be owned by the association, maintained, et cetera.
And further, I noticed that there are students that we are expecting to come with this, or when you said it was age restricted, should we have any impact on the school system?
Oh, no. This is, I think there was some confusion maybe in the very beginning of this project when we filed the application. Stacy and I went round and round a little bit about whether or not this request was truly for this multi-level care use, or was it just, there's this piece of property over there that never got developed. Let's see if we can get it zoned for townhomes and then sell it off to somebody. So I just want to make sure that is not the plan. There is no intention of school-age children to be in this community. This is an elderly care facility. These people will have doctors on hand, nurses on hand, house cleaning, catered food, the ability to, they'll have transportation provided. The impact to traffic even will be minimal. So the concern that we had, you talked about, Ms. Walker, about the traffic. Keep in mind, these are folks that would be, whoever that was, but these will be very low impact on traffic. I mean, you can just imagine as you move into this type of facility, maybe one car at most. But the idea behind this complex is that everything that you need is inside of this gated community, from doctors, pharmacists, I mean, educators, health and wellness, you name it. They'll have those features available to them.
Thank you.
I have one question. You were talking about the townhouses, they're not going to be multi-leveled, are they?
No, ma'am.
Any additional questions for the applicant? Mr. Moore, there was some concern about the second exit.
Okay.
What is the future plan for that?
So I'm happy to talk about that. The applicant does own the property immediately north of this, and it does have the opportunity to connect to Technology Parkway. That was shown intentionally because there would be, in the future, a plan to extend that. Now, keep in mind, this is a gated facility, so, I mean, if it's extended, it would just be for purposes of providing an additional ingress and egress route out. That property is also in the city of Stockbridge, and it's not zoned to support anything like what we're proposing here. So it would be, whatever the future holds for that property would be subject to some future discussions with the city, but the current plan is not to necessarily extend and expand this facility. I think this facility is sized appropriately with the different 3 levels of care in and of itself. Now, it could be another assisted living facility up north. I don't know. We haven't discussed those plans, but as far as access goes, that is a plan. Now, I wasn't going to mention this until the zoning hearing, but I feel like it's very appropriate to do right now since we're having this conversation. There is a zoning condition that you'll hear about that restricts the development to 30 units without extending that road. So that 30, you can tell that's going to be a fairly expensive crossing. I mean, I can tell you it will. And I can tell you that the Corps of Engineer rules just changed within the last 60 days on the ability to get permits across live streams. Made it much more difficult. Not to say it's not going to happen. I'm just saying to only allow 30 units before you have to spend probably $300,000 or $400,000 to cross that creek in a community that's not going to be heavy traffic generators feels over the top. And I think that 30 unit max condition comes from the International Fire Code, and it's section D-107. And this has recently been enforced by the Henry County Fire Department on residential projects that says that if you have more than 30 units, you have to provide two access points, not necessarily 2 permanent access points, but you got to provide an emergency access point in addition to your primary entrance. Now, that section in the International Fire Code is under what's titled 1 and 2 family dwellings. That's just the category that it's under. But it also provides that it says that rule doesn't apply, that limit doesn't apply if you're going to sprinkle protect your buildings. If these are going to be sprinkle protected, these are going to be, I mean, again, in a whole level of care and trying to keep people safe and healthy, they'll be sprinkle protected. So based on the International Fire Code, the 30 unit restriction doesn't apply. Further, in section D-106, for multifamily developments, the cap is 100 before you need a second access. Well, these are condominiums. The ULDC defines condominiums as multifamily. So I think that's the section that should be looked at, and it caps it at 100 units, which is exactly what we're requesting. So the plan will be to extend that road in the future. We would like to, again, when we get to the next case, talk about modifying that condition to just following the International Fire Code rather than putting a cap on us at 30 units. Because we do feel like, again, based on the use of this project, it's going to be a low traffic generator. We're not going to overburden anything, and we feel like 100 is more appropriate. Or follow the International Fire Code, and we're willing to do that, certainly.
Okay. But based on that fire code, you're saying that at 100 units, you're going to be required to provide
After 100,
that,
yes, sir.
provide that exit. So in your case here, are you, you're going to be at 100 units, correct?
We'll be at 100. So over 100 requires 2. But you can also, that cap goes away if they're sprinkle protected. And so, and we meet both. So I was just giving options for how we can justify that 100 number.
Okay. All right, understood. All right. Any additional questions for the applicant? Okay, if there's no additional questions, we have a remaining about close to 6 minutes for anyone wishing to speak in favor. I'm sorry, 4 minutes. I'm looking at, we have about 4 minutes for anyone wishing to speak in favor. Okay, no one's coming forward. We'd like to allot 10 minutes for anyone wishing to speak in opposition. All right. Does the board have additional questions for staff or the applicant? Ms. Randolph?
I'm wondering, what is the impact on our healthcare system by this, more high-need community?
So, Ms. Randolph, if I could summarize your question and correct me if I'm wrong. You're asking what is the impact on our healthcare community of this development if it's approved? I would say that the impact should be positive in that this applicant, who has been providing care since the 90s, is attempting to increase the scope of their service. So what the applicant has stated is the fact that in 1997 they were approved for skilled nursing, assisted living, and independent living, and at first they only built the skilled nursing, and now they're ready to blossom into the other two. So in my estimation, that's a positive impact on the services that are provided to the community. And to have that service provided in an area that and I don't know if people who need that level of care are ambulatory enough to walk across the 50 acres, but it would be a walkable community. So it seems like a really nice proposed development. So in my estimation, I would say that the impact would be positive.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Any questions for staff or the applicant? If not, we'd like to call the case, please.
Comprehensive Plan Amendment 2105, Southern Crescent of McDonough, Georgia, requests an amendment to the comprehensive plan for property at 2125 Highway 42 North in land lots 31 and 34 of the 7th District. The property consists of 19.995 plus or minus acres, and the request is to amend the future land use map designation from industrial to mixed use. Located in District 4, presented by Stacy Jordan Rudisil, Assistant Director.
Okay. We've heard the case. Do we have a motion?
I make a motion that we approve the amendment.
Okay. Have a motion. Do we have a second? Have a second. All right. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries and unanimous.
Thank you.
All right. Call the next case, please.
Rezoning RZ 2118, Southern Crescent of McDonough, Georgia, request a rezoning from OI, Office Institutional, to MU, Mixed Use, for property located at 2125 Highway 42 North in land lots 31 and 34 of the 7th District. The property consists of 19.995 plus or minus acres, and the request is for mixed single-family and institutional living development. Located in District 4, presented by Stacy Jordan Rudisil, Assistant Director.
Good evening again, Mr. Chair,
Good evening.
board members. This hearing is the associated hearing regarding rezoning to our previous hearing for this location of the Southern Crescent Brain Trauma Center, just under 20 acres. And this, the location of this subject property is on the west side of Highway 42, just north of the new Campground Road extension. The zoning of this subject property is OI, which is illustrated in that blue color that's on the overhead and also in your exhibits. The green color that nearly surrounds our subject property is the city of Stockbridge, but one can tell by the map and the layout of lots that it does back up to residential and other uses. And so the request for mixed use with a residential component would seem in keeping with the character of the area. Our future land use map, and it's very difficult to tell because it's isolated. The city of Stockbridge is shaded in white. The subject property itself is shaded in green, but the future land use map is actually a gray color, which indicates industrial, which the most recent recommendation of this board was to change that from industrial to mixed use. We've taken a look in our previous hearing at the site plan for the subject property. Let me just state that in the shaded area, this is the existing skilled nursing facility. This is the proposed assisted living. And I don't recall exactly how many beds this assisted living facility will have, but our applicant can tell us more about that. We can see initially a street of detached, independent living dwelling units. And then as you get further back into the development, there's a nice grid system of attached and independent living units, and then the proposed second entrance across the property that the applicant indicated in our last hearing the applicant actually owns to Access Technology Parkway, which can get one back to Highway 42 and provide a second access point, relieving the main access point on Highway 42 that's existing today. Staff has evaluated the applicant's request. We've considered that the applicant and his agent has consistently stated that this will be a continuum of care of those who may need assistance but choose an independent living arrangement. And then if perchance additional care is needed to graduate, if you will, from independent living to assisted living. And then finally, if it comes to that, to move into the skilled nursing facility that's existing on this site. So we've considered that. We've considered the character of the area. We do recommend approval of the applicant's request with 10 conditions, and we tried to be just as thoughtful as we could with these conditions. We tried to assure posterity that this would indeed be developed as an age-restricted community and would be maintained as an age-restricted community. And it's something that I'm not aware of has ever been developed in Henry County, which is exciting, but it's also scary. The applicant can tell us more about how much they expect these condos to sell for. And maybe the applicant can tell us a little bit more about how the manager and the owner of the facility has the right of first refusal when and if the owner of those condominiums are ready to sell. And also, the applicant has stated that one of our topics of conversation that they wish to bring up in this hearing is regarding the second entrance. So let me just state that it may very well be the case that the fire code, since it does give the allowance for facilities with the sprinkler system, that the international fire code may not require a second entrance until you get to 100 dwelling units. But in our conversation with our public safety and our fire department, they requested a condition that stated that there would be a second entrance. And so we wrote it up that the second entrance wouldn't have to be built at the very beginning, but only after 30 units were constructed. At that point, the second entrance would need to be constructed. And it's appropriate to have a zoning condition in a case that is not covered by the code, but serves to mitigate what amounts to a negative externality or a negative set of circumstances. And in this case, you've got the existing brain trauma center with the patients that are there. You've got the new assisted living facility, and our applicant will be able to tell us exactly how many beds would be included in that building, plus the 100 independent attached and detached dwelling units. So there's a lot going on here, and staff was confident in recommending that condition, that there be a second entrance, not at the end, not at the beginning, but after 30 units. And I'd be pleased to answer questions.
Does the board have questions for staff? No. Okay. If not, we'd like the applicant to come forward again. Please state your name and address for the record.
Evening again. Steve Moore, Bass Consulting, 1350 Keys Ferry Court, McDonough, Georgia, representing Southern Crescent on the zoning portion of our project. Would you be able to put the site plan back up? Yes, so, again, 100 independent living units is proposed with this application. This, as well as a 20-bed assisted living facility expansion to the existing 60-bed skilled nursing facility. So that would be, get that. No, I'm sorry, 40 beds in the rehabilitation center, 20 in the assisted living, and then the 100 independent living for a total of 160 beds essentially in this facility. Again, the original approval, 97, 200 units is what was proposed on that application. This will be a gated community, as I mentioned before. The applicant is expecting the independent living units to start in the low 200, high 190s, probably closer to 200 by the time this project gets built. And that certainly may flex with some customization that's offered or provided for those units. There is a community center that's proposed at the near just east of that future access stub there. That community center will feature a swimming pool, exercise facility, meeting rooms, business offices for the residents of the community. There's also several outdoor little park areas for outdoor recreation, those types of uses. Again, age restricted. I just want to make sure I draw that distinction. This is not a sham, and we're not trying to pull one over on you. This is a truly legitimate multi-level care of business. I'm going to read some information that was provided by the applicant, and as he and I were working through this project, and he was painting his vision to me. But the overall objective is to create an environment and choices that enable older adults to experience fully actualized, creative, and satisfying aging. Southern Crescent will provide swimming, wellness and exercise rooms, community center for social gatherings, cafes, business centers, walking trails, a woodworking shop, craft room, and more, with a range of educational programs that promote medical care, wellness, and nutrition. The residents' access to services is provided through the existing rehabilitation center, which is already adequately staffed to handle this. That center staffs an interdisciplinary medical staff consisting of 24 nursing and nurse technicians, in addition to daily physicians, physical, occupational, and speech therapists. Services provided by that center to the residential community include, but are not limited to, medical, rehabilitation care, pharmacy, food preparation, transportation, and housekeeping. Strict covenants will be developed and enforced for the community. These covenants will be structured to maintain the age-restricted requirements, as well as to outline the legal process for transitioning the residential units back to Southern Crescent upon the homeowner's passing, or transferred to a new section of the facility. In addition, those covenants will outline the method for maintenance of all of the common areas, the exteriors of all the units, the lawns around all of the units, the signage, fences, and the buffers that encompass the property to buffer us from the neighboring communities. all of which would be owned and maintained by Southern Crescent. Moving to Southern Crescent, you're making an investment in yourself, an investment in the community, and ultimately an investment in a worry-free future. Physicians and nurses are on standby for peace of mind, and knowing that you can transition from one level of care to another all in one community without ever having to move means that your care and safety is always accounted for. Southern Crescent is more than just residence, it's a lifestyle. The project will offer seniors the ability to live in 42 acres of resort-style environment with a complete continuum of care, all in the same community. So again, that's the vision from the applicant. I think he's proven to the community that he is a successful businessman and doctor, and knows what it takes to make this to take the next step in this project. Back to our conditions. I'm okay with all the conditions. I really do have a problem with that one, only because there's an ordinance for a reason. There's an international fire code for a reason. It gets thrown in my face all the time as a consultant. You got to file. You have to have, this access because you got more than 30 lots. Why? Oh, because it's an international fire code. Okay. Now let's follow the international fire code if we're going to follow the international fire code. This project has got access. It will have access in the future. We want to give Dr. El-Sawi the opportunity to get a little bit farther down the road than 1/3 of his project. Again, less overall beds than what was originally proposed in 1997. But we feel like, something better than 30 is certainly more appropriate. I think if we're going to follow the code, let's follow the code. That's just my opinion. And again, I know how to do my job, and I know what rules people tell me I have to follow, and then just arbitrarily take those rules away and apply a different set, I just don't understand. But nonetheless, I'm happy to answer any additional questions you have, happy to move forward, and I'll take any questions you've got.
Okay. Ms. Walker.
How much are the units proposed to cost?
Starting at $200,000.
Okay. Now, so you're saying that, okay, they're in independent living. They get to a point where they need assisted living. Do they sell their units, or they automatically can go to
Those units will be sold back to the Southern Crescent
be
enterprise.
guaranteed that they will get their money back?
Absolutely. Plus,
sold.
I'm sure whatever the fair market value is, hopefully they appreciate over time.
What's the age? You kept saying it's going to be age. Do you have an age that they're?
I think that technically age-restricted community starts at 55. However, my guess is that's probably young for this type of facility, unless you needed those levels of care. If you were a brain trauma recovery victim, or you were in an accident and you were permanently, required to have or dependent on that full-time care, then certainly you would have that opportunity.
Okay, what do they foresee doing if just by chance they started building the 30, they sold those, and then they got more units and they could not sell them? The independent units. What would you do then? Because it is about, I understand about you to make money, but so what would you do if you could not sell those units with maintaining this 55 age?
They're not going to build all of the units at one time. So I think, they're going to look at the demand that they have and the needs, and they'll probably build them in phases of maybe 4 or 5 at a time, fill those up. When they know that they have those under contract and there are people waiting to close, they'll start the next batch. But I think that they'll do a diligent job of balancing the supply and with the demand for those services. But I certainly believe that the demand is gonna be pretty significant, especially being one of one in the county that offers this. And again, was on a team that worked on one of these in Henry County, and the project, for whatever reason, due to funding, never happened. It was right before the recession. But we had the opportunity to tour several of these facilities in Peachtree City, and I would invite you to if you just ever wanted to go look at them. Very impressive. It really kind of brings a level of comfort to know that when it is your time to move into a place like that, there's some really, really nice places.
Well, maybe what I should have asked is, what is the minimum that you have to sell to continue this project. Because I'm just saying, what if you could not sell these units to the age group you're doing? Do you change age groups? Do you
Oh, no.
do something different?
I mean,
Or
not-
what
it
is the
wouldn't be
minimum
younger.
units that you would have to sell to continue to go with this?
I mean, they've owned this property for 25 years. I don't think that this is not they have to sell a certain number of units to keep in business. This is just a way that they can enhance their current business to offer different levels of services. So they wouldn't be spending the time and energy with me and wasting you guys' time if they didn't think that there was a demand. But I can assure you that if they build 3 units and they got a for sale sign out there and nobody's knocking on the door, they're not going to say, okay, we're going to make them 40 and up. You know, you don't have to be 40 to get in here now. That is not going to happen. That is not going to happen. This is a participation in the independent living is an all-in participation in the whole Southern Crescent facility. Because again, you have access to the meals, you have access to house cleaning, yard maintenance, exterior maintenance, all pharmaceuticals support, medical support, nursing, everything is part of this package.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Walker. Mr. Beam.
At what point would the expansion to the assisted living be? Is that at the start, or is that after you built some? And
There is I've learned a little bit about this just after working with Dr. El-Salwe on this, but there is certainly one builds on the other. So the assisted living facility really needs the independent living to ultimately provide the customers that would move into the assisted living. So there will largely be, some number of units. I don't know that we have that exact number, but I think the first phase would definitely include the independent living. And then when they had that certain number of residents and their numbers worked, then they would start the construction on the assisted living facility.
And the other, and I guess to staff maybe, as far as in the condition for an acceleration, deceleration lane, is there anything in there for a left turn? Because I was there today, and that traffic on 42 is a nightmare, and there is no left turn lane.
Yes, sir, Mr. Neal. I know that the traffic is bad in that segment of Highway 42. The short answer to your question is yes. The code requires that a development that is expected to generate a certain amount of traffic would have to complete a traffic impact study. And based upon that traffic impact study, it would be determined what improvements would be required. And that's typical for the Henry County Department of Transportation. Highway 42 is under the jurisdiction of the State Department of Transportation. However, we did get confirmation on yesterday that as long as we provide GDOT with a copy of the county requirements, that they will enforce them. So the short answer is yes, but we would need to put them through the process that the ULDC requires to find out if a left turn lane is warranted.
Sure, and through this rezoning and that, and getting the building permits, that will automatically happen.
Well, so we'll have a very good idea of what to expect as far as the trips that are generated and maybe even trip distribution. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's automatic. There are a lot of boxes that would have to be checked along the way.
Sure, and I meant by that more the process will have to go through.
Yes, sir.
The transportation department and that.
Yes, sir,
Sorry.
that's correct.
And the last, I hate to even bring it up, the highway overlay district.
Yes, sir.
Is that affected here?
Oh, yes. This
So-
property is within the Highway Corridor Overlay District. It is a development, and it would be required to comply with overlay requirements. And a lot of what we do, and Mr. VM, I'm glad you brought this up, a lot of what we think of when staff is evaluating the requests, we may make assumptions. So for example, in the southern part of this site plan, where the access drives simply end, as staff, that doesn't trouble us because we assume that in the development plan review stage that will be addressed probably by the fire department. And if that's something that's not okay, according to their standards, the applicant will be required to redraw that to something that would comply. And just because this site plan may not show strict compliance with the overlay doesn't mean that it won't be required to. But that is an assumption of staff, so I'm glad that you brought that up, Mr. VM.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions for an applicant or staff? Okay. May be seated, sir. We have 2 minutes remaining for anyone wishing to speak in favor. No one's coming forward. I'd like to allot 10 minutes for anyone wishing to speak in opposition. Okay, call the case, please. I'm sorry. Does staff have any additional questions does the board have any additional questions for staff or the applicant? Call the case, please.
Rezoning RZ 2118, Southern Crescent of McDonough, Georgia, request a rezoning from OI, Office Institutional, to MU Mixed Use for property located at 2125 Highway 42 North in land lots 31 and 34 of the 7th District. The property consists of 19.995 plus or minus acres, and the request is for mixed single-family and institutional living development. Located in District 4, presented by Stacy Jordan Rudisil, Assistant Director.
Okay. We've heard the case. Do we have a motion?
I make a motion that we approve with conditions.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Do we have a second? Second. All right, any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Unanimous. Call the next case, please.
Rezoning 2110 Eagles Landing, or RZ 2110, Eagles Landing IL-AL Investors LLC of Roanoke, Virginia, request a rezoning from C2 General Commercial to OI Office Institutional for property located west of Patrick Henry Parkway and east of Interstate 75 in land lot 46 of the 6th District. The property consists of 7.975 plus or minus acres, and the request is for an assisted living facility located in District 4, presented by Kamal Al-Salam, Planner 2.
Good evening, Chair and board members. The rezoning request in front of you is for property located on Patrick Henry Parkway. The property is currently zoned C2 General Commercial. The parcel is 7.975 plus or minus acres, and the applicant is requesting a rezoning from C2 to O&I for the purpose of an assisted living facility. The subject property is highlighted in green and is east of I-75 and west of Patrick Henry Parkway. As you can see, the property is zoned C2, right here, with a collection of O&I properties across the street from it. The property has a future land use designation of mixed use, which does support the O&I zoning district. The site plan submitted in the application is shown on this slide. It consists of one 4-story building with 190 units and meets all setback requirement standards for the O&I zoning district. This is elevations that the developers submitted for the presentation. The applicant is requesting a rezoning from C2 General Commercial to O&I Office Institutional for the purpose of a senior living community with a continuum of care including independent living, assisted living, and memory care. The principal use will be an assisted living facility. The property is currently vacant and the parcel is not within the Highway Corridor Overlay District. The property was a part of a larger rezoning with the properties immediately surrounding it that the Henry County Board of Commissioners approved to be rezoned from PD to a mixture of O&I and C2 on August 18, 1998. Staff recommends approval of the applicant's request with the following conditions.
Does the board have questions for staff?
We're on Patrick Henry. They have the rehabilitation hospital going in on there. They have the other senior development that's going up at the, kind of like at the top of the hill of Patrick Henry.
Yes, ma'am.
That's a lot of activity for such a narrow area, because anytime there's any kind of accident or anything, all of that traffic from the expressway feeds on, and it's backed up all the way over there, and where the light turns, they constantly have accidents. I don't know how it could take so much additional activity.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, Ms. Walker. County DOT has already expressed that they're going to widen this road. It's 2 lanes now, and they're going to widen it to 4 in the future. Every property on this road already has the right-of-way cut out of it for that expansion. So we suspect in the future that this area is already becoming more popular. So we suspect that they will widen it, already. They have plans for it.
Okay.
Any additional questions for staff? Okay. If there's no question, we'd like the applicant to come forward, please. Please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ken Hartel. I am the civil engineer for this development, and accompanying me is Cameron Swengel, who is the developer for this senior living community. So I'm going to turn it over to Cameron just to give you a brief intro on who our team is and what we'd like to bring to the community.
Hi, thank you, Ken. Good evening. My name is Cameron Swengel. I'm with Smith Packet. I also represent the applicant, Eagles Landing, ILAL Investors. Also with us tonight is Wynn Bishop, our Senior Vice President, Development Construction, and Ron Crump, Continental Group's partner and licensed engineer. To introduce you to Smith Packet is a family-owned senior living development company with offices, in Roanoke, Virginia, and Charleston, South Carolina. We were founded in 1982 with almost 40 years of experience, and we're currently considered one of the most prominent and active senior living developers in the United States. To date, we've developed or acquired 150 senior living facilities and long-term care communities. Currently, we have 14 communities in development and 15 communities in construction, with over $1.1 billion in total project costs. Our communities offer a continuum of care, including independent living, assisted living, and memory care. Our communities are approximately 190 units, 4 stories, and 200,000 square feet. Our sister company and operator is Harmony Senior Services, and they currently operate 28 communities east of the Mississippi. They have an excellent reputation in senior care, offering 24/7 nursing staff, and an excellent reputation in community engagement with full-time activity staff and connections to the community, including a physical therapy center in the community, as well as programming with the community. Our communities provide approximately 100 jobs through 3 shifts in the community. Each community is an approximately $45 million investment and significant addition to the tax base in your community. Senior living residents do not have school-aged children and do not burden the school system. Most seniors do not drive, and communities do not significantly impact traffic. And our communities offer scheduled trips and transportation via a shuttle to senior residents, including grocery stores, doctor's offices, shopping and entertainment venues, and more. Smith Packet has a team of financial analysts that analyze the market prior to looking for sites. They've identified that Henry County, and more specifically the area surrounding Eagles Landing, is a market that is demonstrating a need for senior living. Our analysts identify key metrics, including population of age and income qualified individuals and penetration rates of existing competition. Our lenders and equity partners rely heavily on this analysis, as well as a third-party analysis that's done prior to closing. Our analysts account for existing and new competition. For example, the Oaks at Eagles Landing is currently under construction and does not affect the viability of this project. Patrick Henry Parkway is favorable for senior living with proximity to Piedmont Henry Hospital, retail and restaurants, and access to I-75. The location is ideal in terms of residential so that community members that are aging or elderly can remain in the community and still remain close to their adult children. As Kamal discussed, the site is along Patrick Henry Parkway across from 2500 Patrick Henry Parkway between Eagles Landing and Jodeco Road. Eagles Landing ILL Investors is requesting rezoning from C2 general commercial to O&I office institutional. The future land use is MU mixed use. The community that we intend to develop is approximately 4 stories and 200,000 square feet. The community will be a rental model rather than a buy-in model. It'll offer a continuum of care including 190 units, 100 independent living, 60 assisted living, and 30 memory care units. Approximately 60 assisted living and 30 memory care units will be licensed with the state of Georgia. The community will offer amenities to the residents, including a central dining room for each level of care, pub, bistro, library, theater, billiards, and so on. The site plan and elevations meet all setback and height requirements. And due diligence shows that Henry County has already made their right-of-way acquisition for the widening of Patrick Henry Parkway, and that a portion of that of the site is actually affected by a grading easement, and that there are potential wetland buffers to the north of the site, or northern portion of the site. As Kamal had shown you prior, this is the elevation that we submitted. Typically our building facades have as many protrusions as possible to break up the scale of the facade and offer some depth or relief to it. The lower level of this facade would be intended to be brick, with the upper levels being painted hardy plank, and then a residential shingle roof. We did update the facade slightly. It still has the same character, color scheme, and so on. It does have additional detail under the eaves and a cupola on the roof of the porte-cochere. Ken will address the site plan.
So this site plan is slightly updated from our original submittal in March. Since then, we were able to receive the survey and tighten up the design a little bit more. So as you can see, we are proposing 2 full access connections to service this development. In the center is our 200,000 square foot 4-story development, with our parking concentrated primarily towards the front in order to avoid disturbing any residents who may be using our amenities to the rear of the site. And you'll also note that we are proposing a ring road around the entire development to help facilitate fire and emergency access to the site. And lastly, we just wanted to make a few clarifications to the zoning report, just so we're all on the same page. So our proposed development is 190 units approximately, 100 of which will be independent living, and the remaining being a mix of assisted and memory care. And after discussion with the zoning staff, we determined that because this all falls under an assisted living use, that the 16 dwelling units per acre does not limit our development to that quantity. And lastly, we observed in criteria point 7, and as Kamal mentioned, that there will be future roadway work done by Henry County DOT to expand Patrick Henry. And we just wanted to acknowledge that we will be constructing the drives to access our development, but are not anticipating doing any actual road widening ourselves. That's all we have. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Does the board have questions for the applicant?
What age group are you targeting?
Yeah, so I heard you speaking previously about age restrictions. Our operator does have an age restriction. I don't have the age offhand. 55 and over seems logical. The average age of our residents for memory care is in the mid-70s, and then the average age of our residents for independent living and assisted living is in the upper 70s, early 80s.
Any additional questions for the applicant? Ms. Randolph?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering, last year in 2020, the legislature changed some requirements for memory care and assisted living with staffing ratios. And so I'm wondering if you're aware of that, and, you know, we have a staffing shortage in Georgia. So building such a large facility and the staffing requirements are going to be higher than they were previously. What's your thought about that?
Yeah, I'll have Wynn answer. This is Wynn Bishop.
I'm Wynn Bishop, Senior Vice President for Smith Packet. We are developing some other facilities in Georgia. Harmony's very aware of all the staffing requirements and all the licensing requirements for AL, which memory care is a part of, so they are aware of that. And they do understand the challenges of hiring staff. It's in other states, we have the same issue, so but we're aware of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions for the applicants? Okay, if not, you may be seated. We have 2 minutes left for anyone wishing to speak in favor. Okay, we'd like to allot 10 minutes for anyone wishing to speak in opposition. Does the board have additional questions for the applicant or staff? Ms. Randolph?
I'm trying to picture that part of Patrick Henry. It goes up to where Georgia Power has their offices on the left, and there's a huge issue on site limitation, so that, you know, we require slowing down before you kind of hit that hill. Is this on that particular hill?
I'm not exactly familiar with that particular hill, but what I will say is that County DOT does a great job of addressing all of those issues and the development part of the process. I do know that this is towards the end where it meets with Eagles Landing. I think that's the road. So it is up towards the end of it, but I'm not exactly familiar with the exact hill you're speaking of.
North of this, where the creek
Pates
goes under
Creek?
the road.
Pates Creek?
Yeah.
Anything, anyone else? Or did you have anything additional, Ms. Randolph?
No, thank you.
Okay.
No, I was just gonna say, before it gets to Eagles Landing Way, it goes, there is Patrick, Country Club Drive that turns in, and you have the traffic going from, they turn off from the expressway, they turn there, you have them turning left, you have them making U-turns, and you have some going straight. And they have numerous accidents already, and they tried to get a light there, and there was no plans to put a light there, and with the added, and there is a site problem from where she's talking about, because it's right past where the power company is, because there's two buildings, and then there's the power company, and it's the other side of the street, and there are site problems.
I think the applicant would like a chance to answer your question, Ms. Roland.
Hi, yes, I'm a civil engineer for the project, and we are aware that there is a site issue with the slopes in that area. So the location of our two drives have been placed in order to meet the Henry County DOT site distance requirements. We've spaced them far enough apart so that the point with the greatest slope, which causes the site visibility, is avoided. So we believe we will address that concern during the development phase and once we get civil plans designed.
Any additional questions for staff or the applicant? Okay. If not, call the case, please.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Staff would like to read the conditions onto the record as we need to add one. So I'll start from 1 and go down to 4.
Okay.
Staff recommends approval of the applicant's request with the following conditions. 1, architecture shall be consistent with the elevations presented, meeting the approval of Henry County Planning and Zoning. 2, signage shall not exceed 8 feet in height and shall be monument-based. 3, selective cutting of trees along the right-of-way of I-75 shall be permitted according to DOT regulation and for proper siting of the development. Denuding the right-of-way of trees shall be prohibited. And 4, the added condition, a 5-foot sidewalk outside of the planned right-of-way shall be developed.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Any additional questions for staff? Okay, if not, call the case, please.
Rezoning RZ 2110 Eagles Landing IL-AL Investors LLC of Roanoke, Virginia. Request a rezoning from C2 General Commercial to OI Office Institutional for property located west of Patrick Henry Parkway and east of Interstate 75 and land lot 46 of the 6th District. The property consists of 7.975 plus or minus acres, and the request is for an assisted living facility located in District 4, presented by Kamal Assalam, Planner 2.
Okay. We've heard the case. Do we have a motion?
I make a motion that we approve with conditions.
Okay. Have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Call the next case, please.
Variance VR 2103 Eagles Landing IL-AL Investors LLC of Roanoke, Virginia. Request a variance from development standards for property located west of Patrick Henry Parkway and east of Interstate 75 and land lot 46 of the 6th District. The property consists of 7.975 plus or minus acres, and the request is to reduce the required parking from 190 spaces to 160 spaces. Located in District 4, presented by Kamal Assalam, Planner 2.
Good evening again. The variance request in front of you is for property located on Patrick Henry Parkway. The property is directly related to the rezoning we previously heard. The applicant is requesting a variance for parking reduction. The subject property is highlighted in green. This was a site plan submitted with 190 parking spaces. This was a previous plan submitted showing what the parking would look like at 160 parking spaces. And the key difference here is the parking here has been taken away. And I'll go up to the first site plan so you can see the difference. That's the main part of the parking that was taken out to make room for, well, to reduce it to 160 spaces. The applicant is requesting a variance from parking standards for the purpose of a senior living community with a continuum of care including independent living, assisted living, and memory care. The principal use will be an assisted living facility. This use requires 1 parking spot for each of the 190 units. Staff does recognize that 190 parking spaces may be excessive, considering many of the tenants will not be driving themselves. While staff recognizes that not every resident of the assisted living facility can or will drive, not all of the criteria points were met to recommend approval of the variance, especially considering caregivers, deliveries, and visitors requiring parking. Therefore, staff recommends denial of the variance to reduce parking requirements from 190 spaces to 160 spaces. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay. Does the board have questions for staff?
Just want to clarify. So you're thinking because of staff and vendors and visitors to maintain that 190?
So staff thinks that 190 is a bit excessive, but it's subjective, and we don't know how many employees they'll have. We don't know what kind of deliveries they'll have, and things of that nature. But we do understand that 190 is a lot for a use where a lot of people won't be driving.
But your recommendation is to deny.
Yes, ma'am, because there are no topographical or dimensional restraints. So it doesn't meet all the criteria to meet a variance.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. Risher.
Staff looked at the site plan with some suggestions as to where the additional 30 parking spaces could be added. I think just a cursory glance indicates that there's possibly some areas that that are underutilized where there could be some parking.
Yes, sir. So if you look on the screen, this is the original plan with the parking here. I'm not quite sure what the applicant plans on doing with all of this space if the parking was removed, and I'm sure they'll be able to answer that question for you.
Okay. Any additional questions for staff? Okay. I have one question now, and I'm pretty sure the applicant can clarify this. Who made the recommendation to take those out?
The applicant asked, actually.
Oh, okay.
So they initiated the variance request.
Okay. All right. Any additional questions for staff? All right. If not, applicant, please come forward. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name's Cameron Swengel. I'm with Smith Packet and Eagles Landing ILAL Investors. My address is 4423 Pheasant Ridge Road, Roanoke, Virginia 24014. Eagles Landing ILAL Investors is requesting a variance from 190 parking spaces per unit, or 190 parking spaces, one per unit to 160 parking spaces. We don't have any existing facilities with 190 parking spaces to date. Most senior residents do not drive, and staff utilizes 3 separate shifts. That's 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., and then 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So with 100 staff members, you're breaking that up over 3 shifts, and that's at full occupancy of the building. We average approximately 30 peak hour trips. So we're a very low traffic generator. The average age of IL and AL residents is approximately 78 years old. IL and AL residents are allowed to drive, but AL residents typically stop driving within 1 year of moving into a community. Memory care residents are not allowed to drive. It's a secure memory care corridor. They're not allowed to bring cars to the community or drive. So that's roughly 30 residents. Communities offer scheduled trips and transportation via a shuttle to senior residents, including grocery stores, doctor's offices, shopping, and more. And that is heavily utilized. While it is in the city of Stockbridge, the Oaks at Eagles Landing is a similar use along Patrick Henry Parkway with 86 units, 54 assisted living and 32 memory care, and they have 60 parking spaces. Currently, an additional 30 parking spaces would logically be added near the memory care corridor as our plan is laid out, constricting the memory care courtyard and garden and potentially disrupting memory care residents. The current transportation plan encourages alternative forms of transportation for the elderly to improve congestion in some of these corridors.
Hi again, everyone. My name again is Ken Hartel. I'm the civil engineer for this development. And after our initial meeting with planning and zoning, we were able to gather more information on the site, and we just wanted to present these site characteristics to you that we consider are geographical constraints to our design. So as Kamal mentioned, there was a right-of-way acquisition in 1998 that required the minimum width of the right-of-way to be 100 feet. Now, our current survey shows that the right-of-width is more along the lines of 175 feet, so that additional right-of-way width does constrain the developable frontage slightly. So that was one item we wanted to bring up. And associated with that is a grading easement towards the northern corner of our site, which also limits development opportunities. We also wanted to mention that though it's not required by code, we would like to install a fire loop around the entire site to facilitate easier emergency fire access and also to promote better life safety. We also have a geotechnical report of this site that indicates shallow groundwater, and basically what this means is that because the groundwater is so shallow, we have to increase the footprint of our stormwater management systems, and as a result this takes up more space that could be used to the betterment of our residents. And lastly, we have determined that there are wetlands just to the north of our site, and as a result there may be some buffers along that northern border that will restrict our developable acreage as well. And that's all we have. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Yes. Ms. Walker.
When you said you talked about the 60 parking places, what about, did you make it accounting for people that have couples that might have 2 cars? Because even though you think 70 is old, it's really not that old. And when there's holidays or you have visitors or you people that do have people coming, help additional caretakers coming and everything. And when you have the shift change, you have one shift coming that's got to park and one shift that's leaving. So you have to account for all of that. And I don't know, with just one parking place, I don't know how you could do it.
Yeah, and so we do have a calculation for Harmony facilities. I believe it's 1 space per IL unit and 3/4 of a space per ALMC unit. So this has shown successful in 28 communities that they currently have open. We can adjust the shifts. Again, 30 residents from memory care are not going to be driving. The majority of assisted living residents utilize the shuttle to get around. It's very heavily utilized, and the staff is active in programming to get those residents out of the facility. So, I mean, in terms of congestion, we don't see a lot of that in our communities. If anything, we see that the parking's underutilized more often than not.
Mr. Richard.
Do you have any areas that are designated for a bus or van parking?
We do not have bus or van parking per se. They're typical parking spaces, which Ken might be able to elaborate on the dimensions. But we do have a porte-cochere that allows for the shuttle to come and pick residents up and things at the entrance in front of the lobby. The shuttles are not large. They're smaller, larger vans, smaller buses that pick the residents up, maybe somewhere around 20 residents capacity at a time, something like that.
One thing that we want to avoid is to have excess or overflow parking parked on the shoulder of Patrick Henry Parkway, and it's that would not be a good thing. And
we want to prevent that as well.
My concern would be for larger vehicles that would be providing transport for some ambulatory folks and there would have to be some place to park those types of vehicles. And it just appears to me that on the I guess would be the westerly side of your complex, that there is some room where there could be added some parking. Have you looked further at that?
Ken may be able to speak to this a little bit more. He's speaking about adding parking to the northwesterly side, which I believe there's a little bit of a grade.
Yeah, I do believe if we needed to add parking specifically for those larger vehicles, we could install perhaps like a wider road along that area to allow for vans and large vehicles to park parallel with the road. Additionally, I'd like to mention that our proposed road is 26 feet wide, which does meet all of the larger vehicle requirements as far as fire safety. And
Yes, Ms. Walker.
How large are the units?
The units?
I mean, how many bedrooms, basically, I mean, yeah, how large are the units that we're talking about?
Yeah, memory care units are typically a studio, almost always a studio apartment. The assisted living units are studios and one bedrooms, and then the independent living units are go up to 2 bedrooms. So.
Okay. Back to my original question. I'm sorry. Anyone else? Mr. Vim? Go ahead.
Yeah, on a typical shift, how many staff would you have at the property?
Roughly about 30, I believe.
Now, back to the original question. You guys, you took those parking spaces out. What was the true reason? What's the hardship there? Go ahead.
If I may, this is Win Bishop with Smith Packet. We can get 30 more spaces on this plan. You know, that's not the question. The question we had when we started talking to the engineers, if you look at the building, the left side of the building's independent living, the middle's assisted living, to the right is memory care. And all those are green garden spaces. So the memory care space to the right, you want a circular movement for the memory care patients to be able to move. That's a preferred route for memory care. They get easily disturbed, and when we looked at the plan, we didn't like the idea of having the parking spaces looking right at the memory care garden. It's a fenced, 8-foot-high fence. Okay. It's secured access. It's disruptive to the memory care residents. Having the cars there tend to distract them. We'd rather have green space and a fence in that area instead of parking spaces. So, and the fact that memory care is 30 units and none of them drive, we've kind of felt like with the 160 parking, if you take out the 30 and it's a 1-to-1 on the remaining units, made sense. And it also fit in with the Harmony formula for a number of parking spaces that they need. And when you go to our facilities, there's not a overabundance of parking. There's enough parking spaces there for everybody, and there's not a shortage of parking. Go ahead.
If you move to the left of those spaces, we couldn't pick up those other, just say 15 in each of them. So, because I think we're off by, what, 30 spaces?
30 spaces.
Yes.
Ken, where are you? I'm not sure exactly where we're talking about.
yeah, I think I know where you're talking about. You're talking about to the middle south portion of the site. You're talking about.
Well, if you go back to the original space, where you originally had the parking spaces, move to the left, past that building, that L shape. Just say you pick up 15 spaces there and move further left and pick up additional 15. I mean, was that possible?
I think the issue with that area is because of the steep slopes just south of our ring road. We would have to impact the trees in the slope in that area, and most likely have to do some sort of retaining wall, which is not a very welcoming sight when you're to the rear of the building for these residents. That's why we prefer not to put those parking spaces in that spot if possible.
Okay.
It looks like it would have some room.
Behind the area that says MC Gardens, that you could add a few spaces.
Yes, so that's what I was just addressing. We would have some space there to add some at the memory care garden. It's just that the headlights and the parking are disruptive to these memory care are very sensitive. They're sensitive to sound, noise, light, and having parking and lights and stuff shining in that garden. It's just disruptive to them. Operationally, we would just prefer not to have cars right there at their memory care garden if we could. It doesn't mean it couldn't be done. It's just not a preferred operational thing for Harmony to do.
Well, we We have a lighting ordinance that requires a downcast lighting, so I think that should eliminate.
I'm talking about the car lights.
Well, you could put up a berm or something like that that would block the car lights. There's various ways that it could be done.
All right. Any additional questions for the staff or the applicant? Okay. At this time, we have about 2 minutes remaining for anyone wishing to speak in favor. No one's coming forward. I'd like to allot 10 minutes for anyone wishing to speak in opposition. Okay. All right. Does the board have additional questions for staff or the applicant?
Yes, I'd like to ask one more question of the applicants.
Okay. Please come forward.
Yes.
Can you see your way to meet us at least halfway, maybe at about, say about 20 more spaces? That would be 180.
I think it is feasible to install these. I think the question is if it would be to the betterment of the development. I'll let Wynn speak to that.
Yeah, I think 180 spaces would be reasonable. It's more than we typically do, but I think we would be fine with that. It would help us, I think, I think we could maybe avoid the rear retaining wall if we did that, I think. So I think we would be okay with 180. Sorry, did you hear me? Sorry.
Staff may interrupt. To be frank, if this was something staff could handle administratively, then we would have, or we would in the future. But administratively, we're only able to reduce 5 spots. And that's just based off the rules in the ULDC. It is good practice in planning to, if we feel parking is excessive, to reduce it for a number of different reasons. Particularly because there's wetland there, and pavement it disrupts water flow, and like they said, they already have an extensive stormwater drainage system. So, and also to add spaces would mean directly confronting a condition in the rezoning about cutting trees along I-75, which would protect the integrity of the site, particularly for the residents. Staff would like to make a recommendation that we have the power and influence to reduce up to 30 parking spots, but that isn't saying that all 30 would be reduced, but basically giving staff the power to make that decision, and work with these applicants who've been pretty good to us, especially regarding the loop for emergency control. So if there could be a condition allowing staff to make the decision on the 30 spots, up to, no more, then we would like to put that on the record.
Yeah.
So what you're stating is that you recommend approval based on the condition that staff would have the ability to go back in with conditions and deal with the 30 spaces?
Yes, ma'am. Up to 30 spaces.
Up to 30 spaces.
So if Stacy, who does the administrative waivers, says, we looked at it, we don't think we can do 30 spaces, but we can do 15, then staff will have that power. But right now, we can only administratively waive up to 5.
Ms. Walker, you feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think we can.
It sounds like a reasonable offer.
Offer, yes.
But
It does, Mr. Chair, and I think that would be something for you all to consider. But if it's the pleasure of the board to go that way, to approve with the stipulation that staff would consider up to 30 spaces administratively, If you would also include in your motion that we could impose the conditions such as what was discussed about the screening and perhaps a berm and fencing or whatnot, but just to give staff the authorization to require such things as a part of any administrative approval, that may be appropriate as well.
Okay, so that would be part of your motion. Okay. Any additional questions for the applicant or staff? Okay. If not, we'd like to call the case.
Variance VR 2103, Eagles Landing IL-AL Investors LLC of Roanoke, Virginia, request a variance from development standards for property located west of Patrick Henry Parkway and east of Interstate 75 and land lot 46 of the 6th District. The property consists of 7.975 plus or minus acres, and the request is to reduce the required parking from 190 spaces to 160 spaces. Located in District 4, presented by Kamal Al-Salam, Planner 2.
Okay, we've heard the case. Do we have a motion?
I make a motion that we approve based on the condition that the staff will work with the company regarding the variances for up to 30, and also with the berm and the covering required will be dealt with by staff.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Okay, the next two cases is going to be in District 5, and it'll be chaired by Mr. Vim. You can go ahead and call that case. Call the next.
Rezoning RZ 2111, Ladson International Consulting of Stockbridge, Georgia, requests a rezoning from RA Residential Agriculture to C3 Highway Commercial for property located at 3860 North Henry Boulevard in land lots 34 and 63 of the 12th District. The property consists of 0.621 plus or minus acres, and the request is for automotive sales. Located in District 5, presented by Kenta Lanham, Planner 2.
Good evening, Chair and Board members. The request in front of you is for property located at 3860 North Henry Boulevard, as shown on the aerial map and on your exhibit books, as well as on the overhead screen. It is shown in the green here. It is shown in the green outline with the white infill. As shown on the map, it is zoned RA, with surrounding properties zoned RA for residential agricultural. To the west is M1, light manufacturing. To the north is R3 for single-family residence, as well as City of Stockbridge property. That property is also zoned for residential. And to the south, we see City of Stockbridge property that is actually zoned, I believe, M2 for the quarry. The future land use map designation for this property is commercial. The request is to rezone the property from RA residential agricultural to C3 highway commercial for the sales of automotive vehicles. The property is within the highway corridor overlay district and would need to meet those standards. The immediate area again features residential, commercial, and some industrial uses. Once more, the future land use map designation is commercial, which does support the rezoning request. And on the screen is the site plan. We see the existing home to remain with, if my understanding is correct, a conversion to office space. And in the front, parking lot for the required parking spaces, as well as display for the vehicles to be sold. The existing home, as I previously mentioned, that was actually built in 1964. according to the tax assessor's website. The property as it sits is unable to meet the development standards of the zoning district, both RA as it's currently zoned and C3 as it's proposed to be zoned. A concurrent variance request to address these concerns is running alongside with this request and will be heard following this case. Considering the site, the immediately adjacent properties, and the future land use map designation, staff does recommend approval for the rezoning request with the conditions shown in your exhibit books as well as on the overhead projection screen. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Does the board have any questions for staff?
Yes, Ken, what requirements are they requiring in terms of the overlay, highway overlay?
Yes. So in the associated variance request that we'll see here shortly, and I guess before I go into that, to be clear, you were asking about what relief they are wanting from highway corridor?
Yes, correct.
Okay, perfect. So yes, that is all to be discussed in the variance request following this. The highway corridor overlay district does require standalone commercial properties to have a minimum lot size of 1 acre and a minimum road frontage of 175 feet. The property as it currently sits is 0.621 plus or minus acres with road frontage of 99.5 feet.
All right, that's all I have as of now.
Now the applicant would please come forward.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is John Oladokan, and I'm the owner of Latson International Consulting, LLC. The request before you is to rezone the subject property located at 3860 North Henry Boulevard from residential agricultural to C3 highway commercial. The intended use is automotive sales. The existing building on the property is a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, and this house will be used as the sales office for the dealership. There are no additional development proposed for the property at this time. And on that note, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Now, how many spaces, how many cars will you be able to put on that lot?
The parking spots available there are 18 right now.
18?
Correct, based on the site plan that we've provided.
Okay. All right, I don't have anything else as of now.
Any further questions from the board?
But I do have another. Now, are you familiar with the highway overlay?
I am.
Okay.
I had some discussion.
Now, if we decide to go with this as approval, you are aware that the highway overlay conditions as far as cosmetics will be required?
I understand that, yes, sir.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. So there, with the remaining time, is there anyone else that would like to speak in favor? And seeing none, is there anyone that would like to speak against the rezoning? And since I see none of those, are there any further questions for staff or the applicant from the board? Seeing none, if you would call the case.
Rezoning RZ 2111, Ladson International Consulting of Stockbridge, Georgia, request a rezoning from RA Residential Agriculture to C3 Highway Commercial for property located at 3860 North Henry Boulevard in land lots 34 and 63 of the 12th District. The property consists of 0.621 plus or minus acres, and the request is for automotive sales. Located in District 5, presented by Kenta Lanham, Planner 2.
Do I have a motion?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we go with staff recommendation of approval with the conditions.
Do I have a second? And all in favor? Passes unanimously. Can we call the next case?
Variance VR 2104, Ladson International Consulting of Stockbridge, Georgia, request a variance from RA Development Standards from property located at 3860 North Henry Boulevard in land lots 34 and 63 of the 12th District. The property consists of 0.621 plus or minus acres, and the request is for relief from the Highway Corridor Overlay District requirements and to reduce buffer requirements located in District 5, presented by Kenta Lanham, Planner 2.
Good evening once more, Chair and board members. The request in front of you is an associated request with the most recently heard rezoning request. Again, the property is at 3860 North Henry Boulevard, as shown on the aerial map, as well as on the exhibit books. The property is currently zoned RA, but of course the Zoning Advisory Board just recommended approval for the rezoning request to C3 for highway commercial. And once more, the request in front of you is for relief from the development standards of the zoning district, as well as those established by the Highway Corridor Overlay District. As previously mentioned, the property currently does not meet and cannot meet the development standards that have been established by the ULDC. It is therefore legal nonconforming. Again, the property is, the size is 0.621 plus or minus acres, with road frontage of 99.5 feet. The Highway Corridor Overlay District requires standalone commercial properties to be 1 acre in size with road frontage of 175 feet. To be clear, the RA zoning district as it is currently zoned requires the same development standards. If the Zoning Advisory Board does deny the request, denies the associated rezoning request, the variance would still be required given that it does not meet the development standards of the zoning district. Any improvements, additions, and et cetera that would require permits would not be approved without this approved variance. And that's just in reference to our legal nonconforming section of our ULDC. The applicant was also requesting relief from the buffer requirements, specifically the 40-foot required buffer that would be required along the north and east property lines. The applicant was requesting relief from the required 40-foot buffer for the east side specifically. However, planning staff is able to reduce that buffer administratively to 20 feet with a solid fence. So given the site, given the criterias of highway corridor and the provisions of the ULDC, staff does recommend approval of the variance request to reduce the minimum lot width to 99.5 feet. The minimum road frontage to 99.5 feet as well, and the minimum lot area to 0.621 plus or minus acres. To be clear, the recommendations shown in the staff report and on the screen, the numbers listed 1, 2, 3, those are not conditions, so they're just specifying the development standards to be reduced by this approved variance. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Does the board have any questions for staff?
No, I don't have anything for staff right now. Back to him.
Seeing none, if the applicant would come forward, please.
Good evening once again. My name is John Oladokan. As mentioned by the staff, we are requesting the variance on this property to reduce the lot size requirement to 0.621 acres, and also the minimum lot width from 175 feet to 99.5 feet. Additionally, we are requesting a waiver from the 40-foot buffer on the east side to 20 feet with a solid privacy fence. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone that would like to speak in favor of this request?
I do have a question for the applicant.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Now, are you aware of the highway overlay requirements?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And now my question goes to staff. Now, what are the requirements for the highway overlay that he's going to have to do to bring it up to par?
That is an excellent question. So that would be those addressed by this variance. Again, road frontage and lot size. Highway corridor does also require sidewalks along the frontage of the road, in this instance North Henry Boulevard.
Okay.
The applicant was showing a sidewalk of 5 feet that is just adjacent to, it's just within the property line and adjacent to the parking lot. I believe highway corridor would require a sidewalk of 10 feet, if I'm not mistaken, given that North Henry Boulevard is an arterial road. However, the highway corridor overlay district does also allow staff to handle such things administratively. Some of those would be that sidewalk requirement. Earlier you had mentioned appearance standards, building materials. That is also something that highway corridor allows staff to handle administratively. There were a few other, let me just, so the highway corridor overlay district does allow, once more, administrative waivers to be handled by staff regarding site planning, development standards, sidewalk and streets, frontages, and architecture.
Okay. I just want to make sure that you've been made aware of the other requirements that's there for the highway overlay, and those are requirements that we're going to ask that you adhere to.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now we have 10 minutes for anyone wanting to speak in opposition. And seeing none, are there any further questions of applicant or staff from the board? Seeing none, let's please call the case.
BR 2104, Ladson International Consulting of Stockbridge, Georgia, requests a variance from RA Developmental Standards for property located at 3860 North Henry Boulevard in land lots 34 and 63 of the 12th District. The property consists of 0.621 plus or minus acres, and the request is for relief from Highway Corridor Overlay District requirements and to reduce buffer requirements located in District 5, presented by Kenta Lanham, Planner 2.
And having called the case, is there a motion?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we go with staff recommendation of approval of the requested variances and holding the applicant to all the other requirements of the highway overlay districts.
Is there a second? All right, we have a second. And all in favor? And that passes unanimously. And I'll turn it back over to Mr.
Okay. Well, I think that concludes our cases. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to be adjourned.
So moved. All right. All right.